Will increased taxes cause even more Rhode Island families and businesses to flee the Ocean State? In just a few moments, I'll pose this and other economic questions to House Republican leader Blake Filippi. Welcome to another episode of In the Dugout with Mike Stenhouse. I'm your host. And as we've often said, this is reminiscent of a time back when I played ball, when we would just sit around the dugout before the game and talk about life, politics, whatever. And we do the same with our guests today. We invite various guests to join us on In the Dugout. So today, I'm very, very happy to, first, before we bring on our guest, in my first public report that I released as head of a think tank, and Blake, if you could just hold one moment. We released a report entitled Leaving Rhode Island. We documented the tens of thousands of Rhode Islanders, the millions, if not billions of dollars of wealth they took with them when they left our state. Relatively speaking, Rhode Island suffered one of the greatest losses of people and wealth of any state in the nation. And this same problem persists today. And the root problem of this is high taxes, a stubborn government that appears to care more about the special interests than they do about families and businesses. Rhode Island has, as a share of income, some of the highest taxes in the country. We know we have high property taxes. We have high energy costs. We have one of the worst business climates in the country. We're one of the worst when it comes to job recovery from last recession. And people are voting with their feet. They're leaving. And this year, with this budget deficit that we'll talk about shortly, things could get even worse if we're not careful. So let's welcome House Republican leader Blake Filippi to our show. Blake, welcome to In the Dugout.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
All right, first order of business, as you know, is we're in the dugout, so we got to do something little. So I'm going to put on my URI Rhode Island hat, since we're talking about Rhode Island issues. Both my parents and my son went there. Do you have something for us today, Blake?
Yeah, since I'm a Block Islander, I've got a few things for you, Mike.
All right, what do you got?
I used to wear a black wetsuit, and the little buggers could see me creeping up. And then I just bought this camouflage wetsuit that looks like seagrass, and they don't even see me coming. Got mask, snorkel.
Right.
I've got 15 pounds of lead to get me down deep. And then
stay away from me with that.
Then I got a harpoon gun here. Big bands come back, hook on back here. You got a 3.5-foot harpoon with a little lock, and you shoot the little suckers. Hopefully they're big suckers, and then they go on this line. And then before they rip themselves off the barb, which they sometimes do because they struggle, you gotta hold on. Where is it? You gotta go down and finish the job.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so these striped bass are all over the island right now, and
I'm going to tip my hat to you, because I don't think we're ever going to have quite a display of sportsmanship again on this. So I'm going to take
a sport
my hat
I've been
off
doing.
You're not wearing one too. Well, that was awesome, Leader Filippi. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All right. Look, so many decisions that the General Assembly makes. You lead the Republican caucus in the House. The backdrop is the state of the Rhode Island economy. How did you see our economy pre-pandemic? First, let's start with that. What was the state of our economy from your point of view and your caucus?
We always felt it was anemic. We always felt that we were giving benefits to special interests to the detriment of free market capitalism. When you give out money to people to start jobs, it chases organic investment away. No one wants to come into the state and compete against someone who's getting tax subsidies. in lieu of creating a tax environment that encourages organic growth, we kind of pick and choose. And we say, look at all of our success. We have the new Wexford building. We have a t-shirt maker, all these companies that have gotten government handouts. But really, when you analyze an economy, you got to take a 50,000 foot look at things, and it hasn't been working. It hasn't been working because we've discouraged.
You would think that view might be shared among your Democrat colleagues, and I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But first, I should have mentioned right up front that we're a nonpartisan entity. We have to be even-handed. If we have a Republican on, we have to invite at least a Democrat on, and vice versa. And we did invite your counterpart, Majority Leader Joe Shikarchi, but he declined to appear. We asked the House Communications Director if they would like to substitute somebody else, and they declined to provide anyone else. So 2 questions. First, would you care to comment on their decision not to participate in this important discussion about our economy? And 2, do you think they share those same views? Do they understand the dire straits that the Rhode Island economy has been in for the recent decades?
For the first question, I don't really want to comment on their decision. We all make decisions as elected officials.
Fair enough.
I go on everyone who wants to hear what we have to say. I'm not afraid of vigorous debate. I think the best ideas come out of that.
Agreed.
Maybe in private they share those concerns, but I think the tree is known by its fruit, and the fruit of many of my Democratic colleagues is one of bigger government and government intervention in the free market. So privately they may
special interest handouts, right?
Yeah, Mike. When I got up there, I was amazed. Big business that wants something from government has a lobby. Middle class union that wants something from government has a lobby. Even the poverty industry, I don't want to say industry, but the people in poverty have a very strong lobby. The people who don't have a lobby.
Working Rhode Islander, who lobbies for them?
The individual who lobbies?
Yeah.
That's my point.
Right.
The people who don't want anything from government, who want to be left alone, there's no one there for them at the State House. So I'm happy to see Dan McKee's petition and this group get together of people who are businessmen and women, because they need a stronger voice and they need to get involved. And if they're not involved, it's no surprise.
Talk about that a little bit later, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
I think you would agree that every state has suffered since the pandemic hit. Every state has had some level of shutdowns. It has been our contention that the governor, who's been, and we'll talk about this in a second, who's been allowed to act unilaterally, has imposed especially harsh and inconsistent, I would say, even more so, regulations and shutdowns on the Rhode Island economy. And the data shows that we are suffering one of the greatest GDP losses since the shutdowns. We are suffering some of the greatest job losses, some of the highest unemployment claims. Do you agree that the governor's shutdowns have been overly oppressive?
I think in the beginning, when we didn't know what was going on, right? Like we didn't understand this virus. I don't think it was oppressive in the beginning. I would have opened things up quicker. Definitely would have opened things up quicker. But I can't fault anyone for what happened in the beginning, because there was just a bunch of unknowns. They were saying this could be like the 1918 flu that felled mostly young people. Mm-hmm. But I definitely would have opened things up much quicker. And
we took that position that early on we did what everybody felt like we had to do, but that it went on too long. I mean, the idea of what's an essential business and what's not was especially disturbing to us. I mean, every job is essential. Tell that to some family who just got laid off, that their mother or father's job wasn't essential. So the inconsistencies there really troubled us. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was deeply disturbed when you could go to Home Depot and Walmart, but you couldn't go to your local florist. I felt that was oppressive, and it hurt a lot of small businesses. I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all.
Now, even more disturbing to us than the governor's mandates and dictates and regulations was the fact that the General Assembly sat back and did nothing. Now, you're part of the General Assembly. You're in the great minority. We understand that. But State law says that the General Assembly can end a declared state of emergency by the governor if they so choose to, and therefore you could end or put in your own regulations at your own pace. But yet this General Assembly, for all the critical months and really up until now, has done absolutely nothing and allowed this governor to rule like a tyrant, in my view. Thoughts on the General Assembly's silence during this period?
Total abdication of responsibility. Right when everything happened in early March, we in the Republican caucus said, let's develop a plan. We looked at the statute that says the governor has a broad power to enact regulations, but we're the check and balance. And we pleaded with our General Assembly leadership to set up some type of structure that will enable us to come back and roll back something if we had to. And it was really silence. Silence, which I felt was just deafening. I don't
Did your
understand.
caucus speak out? Did your caucus try to urge them back? I know you proposed meeting in places like the Civic Center or...
Yeah, we the whole time. We're like, what are we doing? Let's just leave. At the beginning was, let's have a plan to meet in case we have to. And then we started looking at what's going on in our nursing homes, saying that we have to get back on the field and deal with this issue. We were very concerned about what we talked about earlier with the business regulation, what was happening at funerals. At the very least, our House oversight should have convened, as we called for, to review some of the decisions of the governor. And I'm not even saying that we would have changed them at the time, but I think the people justifiably were justifiably very concerned that the check and balance on this extraordinary power. The governor has lawmaking and law enforcing power in her own hands right now.
Right.
And I understand the need for that during an emergency, but the check and balance on that is the General Assembly. And we just totally walked off the field and abandoned our responsibility when our state needed us the most.
And why do you think that happened? What was leadership afraid of?
I don't know. I have theories, but I don't know. You're going to have to ask them. I think it was just, there's very few things.
As we mentioned, they declined to show up. Maybe they don't want to answer that question.
Yeah, because that's something they have to answer. And they have to account for, the whole notion of, I think the speaker continuously said, the governor's doing a great job. The governor's doing a great job. You don't want too many chefs in the kitchen. Yeah, you do want a lot of chefs in the kitchen when you're dealing with people's fundamental constitutional rights. Right now, we're not even allowed to dance. Dancing is a form of First Amendment protected expression. You can't go, for a long time, your funerals were limited to 8 people, or you couldn't even have one. Religious rights were curtailed. Our fundamental constitutional rights were being affected, and maybe that was the right choice, but the body that was responsible for overseeing that and at least providing a check and balance just totally abdicated its responsibility. And it was atrocious and an insult to the people of Rhode Island.
Wow. Strong words. All right, let's move on to some more practical current issues, even though those issues we just talked about were only a few months ago.
Yeah. Our first exemplifies a philosophical difference that I'm happy is out there for people to see. As a politician, I think it's important for people to see. When this happened back in March, I don't believe that any state employees were laid off. Recently, they've gone on work share, but that was only within the past month. I think immediately, people were at home on basically paid furlough. And you don't have a right to a government job. I think that we need to shrink government. I think especially now we need to get those people into training programs and get them into a private sector career instead of continuing to perpetuate a bloated, inefficient government system. And frankly, everything is done online now. How many government employees have we reduced in the past 10 years? We haven't really. Everything is online. You don't need all these employees anymore. And I obviously would be concerned about changing people's lives.
The reason behind that. Every government job is, or 90% of government jobs are dues-paying union jobs, and the unions will not let government cut back if it means less money in their political coffers.
Yeah, that's why the middle class
like to admit that, but that's our view of the situation. What do you think?
And it's not just that, but there's a lot of jobs given to family and friends. Yeah. I just see in the General Assembly, we have full employment from Cranston, Rhode Island, because the speaker controls JCLS. unlawfully controls JCLS.
That's the joint legislative budget, basically, right?
Yeah, basically it's $46 million a year spent by a committee that hasn't met in 10 years. And it's basically unilaterally controlled by the speaker, in our opinion, unlawfully. And, we just got a lot of people from Cranston walking around the building.
All right, here's my next beef with the General Assembly leadership. Matt, hope that doesn't include you. Again, based on public comments, and one actually used the term hoping and praying, that it appears that their strategy for dealing with budget deficits is hoping and praying that the federal government will bail out states and municipalities. With the rapid economic recovery we're seeing across the country, I think every day that becomes less and less of a likelihood that there'll be a bailout. There could be another stimulus, but that's not the same as a bailout. And the whole reason this budget discussion has been pushed into July and the summer and maybe beyond is because they're still hoping and praying that something might happen where they don't have to make the hard decisions. Is that a good strategy, to hope and pray for federal bailouts?
Really what they're saying is they're praying that they don't have to cut government.
Right.
They're praying that they don't have to cut government. I think it's an awful strategy. I think even before COVID, we were facing just massive budget deficits, and it's just a result of poor planning and not understanding how the economy works, or understanding and not caring. But no, hoping and praying is not a strategy. If the federal money doesn't come in, we're going to have to make serious cuts, and maybe some of those cuts are overdue.
So there's really, as we laid out in the report that we showed the cover of a little while ago, we're not, part of that relying on federal bailouts is kind of goes with an attitude that as goes the nation, goes Rhode Island, that Rhode Island is powerless and helpless to do anything on its own to help recover faster. Our think tank's part of our national network, and I can tell you, and I can tell our viewers, dozens and dozens of states, General Assemblies were meeting, and they were passing laws. They were cutting regulations. They were putting in legal protections to make sure businesses couldn't be sued if they were doing everything they could to help make recovery from this crisis, happen quicker. So we could have maybe a V-shaped recovery versus a U-shaped or an L-shaped recovery. And that the decisions we make, that you make, that the General Assembly makes, not you, but your colleagues make, will determine what kind of recovery Rhode Island has. And there's three paths they could take. They can raise taxes to fill the budget holes. They could cut spending, government or other. Or they can kick the can down the road and try to figure out some way to finance it and put it all on the backs of our kids, or some combination of the three. What are you hearing about which of those paths we might be looking at in the coming months?
Well, I think it's probably 2 and 3. They're not going to. Oh, so sorry. Number 1 was raising taxes.
Yeah.
Number 2 was cutting government. Number 3 was financing. Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, 1 and 3. I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be 1 and 3. It should be 2. But yeah, I see potentially more financing from the Disaster Emergency Funding Board, which authorized, I think, $300 million in financing back in April, line of credit to spend. I see there's the potential that they're going to have a large line of credit that they're going to try and roll over into maybe a 30-year bond that will get us through this.
Put it on our kids and grandkids, right?
Yeah, put it on the kids and grandkids. And I see businesses.
That's cowardly. That's cowardly, isn't it? Not making the hard decisions they were elected to make.
Yes, completely. It's completely cowardly.
So speaking of taxes, you're our number 1. As you may have seen, it's not showing up too well here, but unions and there we go. Unions and left-wing groups are proposing higher taxes. They're proposing a new wealth tax, which of course will drive even more people out of our state, which is the ultimate problem we have in our state. So we're not growing. If we're not growing economically, if we're not growing our tax base, which means more people making more money, there's no way we can fulfill the promises and we can provide the services that many would like to have. So first of all, two-part question. Your thoughts on this? I mean, they're mailing tens of thousands of these across the state, trying to condition the people to accept higher taxes. Your thoughts overall on raising taxes during this economic, pandemic crisis? And two, what is the union's interest in raising private sector taxes?
Wow. Okay. So what do I think of raising taxes during this recession? I think it's foolish. I think that a lot of what we do scares away business. And then the way you can make it work in this state is by getting a government handout. So a lot of what we're doing, I think, is moving towards a centrally planned economy where if you have the right lobbyists, you have the right buddies.
A poorly performing economy, yeah.
Yeah, most people would start a business in another state, let's be honest. Unless you're in hospitality where, you're on the beach, you can't move your business to Texas. But most other businessmen and women would open up their business elsewhere. There's a manufacturer in Westerly who pays $750,000 more a year in electricity cost than she would pay if she moved to Texas. But she stays here because she loves Rhode Island. But a lot of don't, and a lot leave. So
one of the bills on the table is actually increase carbon taxes and energy costs. I mean, it's just unthinkable.
So I'm really concerned just from a freedom and liberty perspective that we're creating an economy that will only work if you can really get a government handout. And that's going to just create just a centrally planned, government-centric way of economic development. And I think that's the antithesis to the American experiment. And I'm very fearful that if we further raise taxes, it's going to exacerbate that central planning.
And the
that
union's
our government
interest in all this, why are they pushing for this?
Maybe because if there's
CIO, National Education Association, SEIU, all co-sponsors of this campaign to raise taxes.
I'm not inside their head, but I look at it from a perspective that many of their pension systems are going to be in dire straits. They want more money to fund the pension systems, and they want more money to keep salaries up so they don't have to cut salaries and benefits for their membership. And listen, that's their job, right? It's their job to advocate for this. I just don't think that the policymakers should just march to their drum.
They usually do, yeah.
So I can't blame them for advocating for things that benefit their members. I blame the people in the private sector who don't do the same. I don't want to say blame them, but they need to stand up more. They need to get involved in races. The public sector unions are involved in races every 2 years. They're spending thousands and thousands of dollars.
We talked about before, there's nobody fighting for them. Yeah.
And there needs to be. And maybe what's going on now is going to wake up some businesses and make them say, you know what, we need to get involved. It's not only the right thing, but it's in our economic interest. If there was a business group that raised $100,000 and every 2 years spent $10,000 on 10 races in the General Assembly, going after people who advocated against their interests, you would see the state change overnight. Because most politicians, they say, do I have to worry about these people or not? Well, and many politicians feel they don't have to worry about.
Right. And you're probably aware, but another group I founded, the Gatsby Project. I don't run it anymore, but I founded that, and we started a division called the Gatsby Business. And the Gatsby Business Network was designed. Its goal was exactly what you said, but you know what? You just couldn't find businesses who were willing to stand up and speak out or to do anything. They just had this sense of apathy. And you're right, that sense of apathy and that willingness to stand up and engage in the democratic process in a professional and legal way is needed. We need balance in the debate, no question. All right, let's go back to taxes. So in addition to the wealth tax, and we mentioned this carbon and gasoline taxes on the table, there's talk of pausing or delaying the car tax phase out. They're talking about reimposing the sales tax on liquor and wine. They're talking about legalizing marijuana just so they can collect taxes on that, expanding sales taxes to multiple new services on hunting and fishing and fees there, and taxes even on deliveries and increased building and permit fees. The list goes on. And even Speaker Mattiello, he originally was saying, and I heard him say it on the radio myself, that, this is not the time to raise taxes yet. Let's put up the next slide. But yet he put out a survey himself. This is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Basically saying, here are 3 taxes I'm thinking about increasing. And he wanted to get a survey, from his constituents. One of them was, how do you feel about, the car tax phase out? How do you feel about marijuana tax and legalization? And how do you feel about sales taxes being reimposed on, liquor and wine? So even the Speaker of the House seems to be contemplating tax increases right now. So, and I would say the irony of this too, that both committees just yesterday in the House and Senate passed special interest legislation to give firefighters tax-free pensions for life for medical reasons that aren't valid reasons. It's just another special interest handout. So here's my question. In an election year, this is an election year, do the Democrats really think they can get away with raising taxes? That's less money for families and businesses, raising fees on businesses and families who themselves are struggling from this crisis in order to pay for special interest handouts. So they really think voters will not remember in November?
They've gotten away with it for years, Mike.
True. What can your caucus say or do about it?
I think we're going to continue to beat the drum in the messages that we've expressed today. That it's not a time to raise taxes on families. We all know people who are leaving the state, taking their wealth. We need broader base, lower taxes and broader base economics. We need more people paying taxes at a lower rate. You can't keep squeezing this nut, because eventually it's going to run out of juice.
Crisis, right, especially during a time of crisis, the worst time to raise taxes or increase economic hurdles and burdens. Let me ask you this. If the budget includes tax and fee hikes of any kind, or maybe I'll ask it in any way, is there any tax increase? Because we do have, there is a massive budget deficit. And I've said this deficit did not come down from the heavens above. These are man-made, government-made budget deficits through incompetence and through special interest policies over decades. But we are facing $1 billion budget deficit. Is there any tax your caucus might support in order to help plug that hole?
I don't know that there is, to be honest with you. Like, the only thing, and I know a lot of your viewers aren't going to like this, the only thing as someone from South County, which I'm not too happy with, is the car tax phase out. Because what the car tax phase out does is it benefits municipalities that had high car taxes, that didn't manage themselves properly, and had very high car taxes, and was essentially a subsidy from people in well-run towns to people in towns that weren't run well and had to tax your car a lot. So down here in Block Island, we've always had a very low car tax rate. We run good government. Same in Charlestown, Westerly, and South Kingstown. And what the car tax phase out did was cause the people I represent, through their income taxes, sales taxes, etc., to pay money to the state government, and then the state government gave that money to Central Falls, Pawtucket, Providence, what have you, towns throughout the state that had high car taxes. So the car tax is the only thing, as a representative of the 36th district, I would say let's take a look at that, because it was unfair and it was done improperly. It benefited municipalities that for years were screwing their citizens.
Yeah,
whereas
we agree that the car tax and the whole thing was unfair, and you're right, it did punish the more responsible towns. So
with that being said, I support the phase out. It's one of those things that people from out of state look at and say, "You've got to be kidding me! They're going to tax my car." So it's like, I want to get rid of it, but I think it's like it should have been done differently.
Right, so that could be a negotiable point
for me, but I can't speak for the caucus right now. I just can't. Just just as the representative of the 36th district, I found it highly unfair.
Fair enough. You're just 9. Your caucus just 9 members out of the 75 in the House. they have a veto proof. They have a do whatever they want to do majority. Is there any strategy? I mean, is there anything you can do to raise awareness and try to stop potential tax increases that are going to kill our economy for decades to come?
So we're active in probably about 30 races throughout the state, the Republican Party right now. We have probably 20 races that we think we have a shot of winning. And we are just making economic development and the crisis we face center stage.
So you're saying that any tax increases approved this year will become a campaign issue this coming fall?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Because I think right now, the good thing about the crisis we face is it harkens back to what we spoke about earlier, is that this is going to expose people who believe in government above the individual, or people who believe in individuals above the government.
Yep.
And I think that's what this crisis is going to expose. And for those representatives and senators who choose government over the people, I think their record needs to be exposed in the races that are going on.
Yesterday, your caucus put out a media release supporting the lieutenant governor's call and the call of small business groups to use some of the, as you had mentioned earlier, some of the federal funds that are unspent and which were intended to help small businesses to actually start releasing those funds to small businesses. So you kind of got to, and the governor, as you mentioned, was hedging on it. She's hoping to use it to plug budget holes, which is not an authorized use for this money. Again, she's hoping and praying that the federal government will give her more flexibility to plug budget holes. Talk about your release and your position on this issue, Blake.
Yeah, our position is that many businesses were forced to close down. It wasn't their choice. And we lose a lot of these businesses. We lose the tax receipts that the government's going to realize for generations. I probably know 10 to 15 friends who have businesses that are on the cusp right now. And if they go, all the money the government collects from them goes, the hundreds and hundreds of employees that they employ go, and they're going to turn around and start collecting unemployment or certain types of welfare programs and tax our infrastructure even more. I think that the notion that we're not going to release any of these funds and we're going to let businesses go out of business by no choice of their own because we're hoping we can use these monies to prop up government and not shrink the size and scope of government, I just think that's an improper way to look at the role of government in this country. And
are you getting any Democrat support from the legislature on this?
So I've had Democrats off the record call me and say they agree. It's up to them to go public with their position. Unfortunately, I find that many of my Democratic colleagues won't do that unless the speaker jumps first. But now is not the time for cowardice, frankly. Now is the time for leaders to lead. And I'm just unfortunately not seeing that with many of my colleagues. They're waiting for what I see as permission from Democratic leadership to actually take a position. And that's a problem.
All right, let's go to the next slide. So our center put out a release a couple weeks ago, and we suggested another use for some of those unspent federal funds that would fall within the authorized use of such funds. And since schools were shut down because of the pandemic, we all know that while it was a noble attempt to do online education and distance learning, it's not the same thing as being in class. Kids clearly fell behind in their studies from where they need to be. So we're suggesting that, some portion of those funds, maybe 20%, 30%, be spent on what we're calling catch-up ESAs. It would give parents money, much like in a SNAP account, to spend on supplemental educational aid for their kids, whether that be a tutor, online classes, after school enrichment programs, something that would help them catch up on the lost ground from last spring. Have you thought about that? And is the Republican Party in favor of school choice initiatives like this?
So we've
I haven't dug into your proposal, but we have long taken the position that we need to empower families to direct the education of their children.
Even if
State address.
even if that includes public funds?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. If
Even
you recall,
if that includes a private school?
yes, definitely.
Okay.
If you recall, back in January, we came out with a proposal to allow children in failing school districts to take their money and go to other school districts. That was limited to other public schools, but you know, I can't speak for the caucus here. We haven't discussed your issue, but if you have kids that have fallen behind, and you know, with kids, once they fall behind, it's hard to catch up.
Yep.
So I like the way you've named it. I think we have to do anything possible to help them catch up and stay on course to get a good education.
And unlike other school choice initiatives, this does not cause them to have to leave their public school or anything like that. It doesn't matter whether they go to a public school or private school. Every student, and you could make it income tested, I guess, if you wanted to, but this would allow families to be able to afford some supplemental help for their kids, because we know they need it. We know we have a underperforming school system anyway, in large part in this state, never mind having fallen behind last spring. All right, if I can, I'd like to touch one. You mentioned something earlier, so I'd like to follow up, but I'd like to give you one last chance to just wrap up the whole economic discussion before I get into this one last topic with you. So what would be your wrap up of what you expect to happen in the coming months with the budget and the future of our economy, and what the Republican caucus is going to be standing for?
My wrap up is this: if we get federal money, we're not going to make the hard choices we've needed to make for a long time. If we don't get federal money, then maybe there will be cuts that have needed to happen for a long time. And it's the responsibility of us lawmakers to make sure that people don't suffer too much because of that. We have to be smart about where we cut government to wean people off government that they've been dependent on for too long.
All right, you mentioned earlier your call for oversight committee hearings. You guys you guys had a press conference on that. The following week after that, as you're probably aware, we did a pretty significant interview here with a whistleblower from the Department of Health. I felt she was very courageous. I have witnessed dozens and dozens and dozens of pieces of evidence. And we thought it would bolster your call for oversight hearings because, you know, Rhode Island, as you know, and as many of our viewers might know or might not know, that the rate of deaths in our nursing homes from this virus is twice the national average. Maybe 75, 80% of all deaths in the state have come from nursing homes. And our whistleblower claims that the years and years of negligence that she can document, and she has evidence for, of uninvestigated cases at nursing homes has just led to a culture that when the pandemic hit, there was no controls, no systems, no discipline in place to deal with it. But yet the media, the politicians, nobody wanted to follow up with the whistleblower. The oversight committee led by Chairwoman Serpa has showed no indication of willing to look into this. Can I ask you, if oversight committee hearings do resume, will you invite Lisa Camuso, the Department of Health whistleblower, to testify?
100%. 100%. And she can come. The public can testify. I mean, I think she should take front and center, but if they don't invite her.
If there was members of the committee who openly supported her coming, you know that.
Agree completely. I openly support. And if they're not willing to give her front and center space, then we would insist that she be given unlimited time as a member of the public to say her piece. But I don't think that our Democratic leadership wants to hear this. They don't. It's going on. We fluctuate between the highest and third highest rate of deaths in nursing homes in the entire country. I've gotten a lot of reports about things that just make me very concerned, and how our General Assembly can do hearings on, and these are important, they can do hearings on MTM, transportation for seniors, the DCYF crisis,
UHIP. These are all issues that we got involved in while the crisis was happening. Our speaker has said that this is not the time for oversight. The time for oversight is when it's over. And frankly, that does not comply with the history of oversight. And I do not want to stand by and wait and then just count the bodies and say, if we only had known, Mike, if we only had known what we know now, it would have been so different.
Well, we are still counting bodies, unfortunately, and nobody seems to care anything about it. Leader Filippi, thank you for being with us on In the Dugout. As we sign off, let me ask you again to bring up that harpoon. Now listen, don't be using that, okay? Don't be using that on anybody. Just save that for the sharks or something like that. But thanks for being with us, Leader Filippi.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Okay, for In the Dugout, this is Mike Stenhouse. We'll see you next inning. Take care.